Hey guys, Bill the Kansas Flamingo Chef. Welcome to another episode of beer making. Today is day one. Now, I just want to show you all the equipment and the items that are going to be utilized to make this. And the very first step, which I've already done, which is sanitizing everything. So, let's go through. I did something I normally don't do. I actually ordered a kit. The reason I did that was because I thought that would be the easiest way to show you how you can homebrew instead of just putting it all together. So when you order one of these kits, this one happens to be from Northern Brewing. It's their German Lager Oktoberfest edition. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes in this box. You're going to have a bag. This has two things in it. This pink packet is actually your yeast, your lager yeast that you're going to use. And then there's corn sugar. For those of you who don't know, this is corn sugar. It even says it right on the bag. This is your primary brewing sugar. When we get to the final stage of actually bottling, this stuff is very important. So then we've got some what's called DME, which is just an abbreviation for dried malt extract. This one happens to be a Pilsen Light Briz. So this is just malted grain that's already been worked down, and then the powder from that. So it saves a little time. All right, next, this is grain. This is just crushed grain. Now, if you're doing beer from the beginning stages, you're going to select your own grains and actually mold them down yourself. This is just the grain that's already been crushed. Okay, so this next bag, these are hops. Now, if you don't know what hops are, they're flowers. These are actually crushed down and then made into pellets. This is what gives beer its flavor. And last but not least, oops, clang clang, this giant heavy bucket of stuff. This is amber malt extract syrup. So this is basically beer wort that's been reduced into a syrup, so that it saves you a whole lot of time of producing that. And then they also include this little bag, and this is what you're going to put your grains into to stimp them, which is the first part of the process. Okay, so before we start actually brewing, the absolute first thing you have to do is clean everything. So this thing, your tubing, your testing supplies, your bottles, and especially your brewing pot. Everything has got to be clean and sanitized. Now, I like to use this one-step sanitizer. It's very simple. It's just a powder. You mix it with some hot water, and after you clean the item, then you sanitize it. It makes it work. You're going to do the same thing to the bottles before you put the beer into them. But one of the very important things on these bottles is you have to make sure they are perfectly dry before you start putting any liquid into them, your beer. So this, when you clean and sanitize them, they're going to go into this rack upside down and let all of the remaining liquid out of them so we don't leave any weird flavors in the bottle. All right, so the next step is we're going to start doing the wort in that big kettle over there. You need 3.5 gallon capacity minimum. So I'll see you for the next step. So the first thing we have to do is take the bag of grain that I showed you before and put it into this, well, sock for all intensive purposes, and then put 2.5 gallons of water in this container and stimp the grains. And what that means is we're going to cook them slowly, not letting the temperature of the water get over about 170 degrees, and we're going to let that float in there for about 20 minutes. Once that's done, we're going to take the bag of grains, throw it away, and we're going to start boiling up the beer wort. So I'll show you what it looks like step by step. Okay, so with this, I've got 2.5 gallons of water in the container. Now, before I do anything else, remember this. It is imperative that you sanitize everything. Even this water pitcher was sanitized before I started putting water in here. So as we get ready to steep the grains, I like to use a large container for the grains and a smaller container to pour them into the sock, if you will. both of these were just sanitized. Very important. So let me show you what I do next. Also, I've got a long thermometer, also sanitized, which we will constantly check the water temperature with. So if it gets over 170 degrees, we've got to bring that heat down. Like right now it's sitting at about 150, so I'm going to turn the heat down already to keep it from getting too hot. Let's get the grains ready. There's no perfect way to do this, but you see I've got this container that I've already sanitized and the other one inside and out. And all I'm going to do is just bring them up from the large container to the small container and just kind of dump them into the bag. All right, once you have your grains all bagged up, it's a real good idea to leave just a little bit of slack and then just tie a simple knot at the top. That's all you really have to do, because that's going to go into the water. You're going to notice a lot of grain dust laying around. You do want to clean this up. It is highly flammable. Man, does it smell good. But this is going to go into the water. We're going to check our water temp real quick, which is sitting at, it looks like about 130. So we're going to bring that heat up a little bit because we don't want it below our steeping temperature by very far. All right, it's time to put the grain in the water. Real simple operation. That's all there is to it. You just want to keep monitoring this temperature so you don't let it get over 170 to 175 degrees. If it reaches that point, you need to bring your heat down immediately. Set your timer at this point for about 20 minutes. You can let it go a little longer if you want, but 20 to 25 is really all it needs. I just want to show you what it looks like while you're steeping the grain. You can see that color is actually leaching out into the water, and that's exactly what we want it to do. That's what happens as you steep the grains. It just creates that beautiful color that's going to be our beer. All right, so after 25 minutes of the grain steeping, they are ready to come out of the pot. Got a freshly sanitized pair of tongs. We're just going to reach in here, get a hold of this thing, try not to let it rip. Let as much of the liquid come out of it as you can. And it takes, you might have to rest it on the side. Don't squeeze it, because then you're going to push the grain right out of the bag. Once you get that pretty well drained, set it over into a container. Now here you can give it just a little bit of squeezing, not very much. Kind of get everything that's left. Go ahead and turn your heat up to high. We're going to bring this to a boil. And then we're going to add the 2 pounds of dry malt extract once it comes to a boil. We're also going to go ahead and throw these grains away, and the little bit of liquid that came off there is going to go back in to the pot. And we'll bring it to a boil. Okay, so we got a pretty good boil going. So what we're going to do is actually take the kettle off the heat and then stir in our DME, dry malt extract, which, by the way, don't get this stuff on your hands. It gets sticky. I mean, because it's a sugar, basically. It's our fermentable product. So we're going to move this off the heat, put the DME in, stir it together with a sanitized utensil, and then we'll put it back on the heat and bring it to a boil and add our hops for about 45 minutes before we add the syrup, the malt extract syrup. So something like this. Take this off the heat. Put your dry malt extract in here. Get as much of it out of the container as you can, because it'll pick up the steam and get really sticky in that container in a hurry. and then just mix it in. Don't stir too fast, just move it around until you see it's all broken up. If you've got any still stuck to your container, go ahead and rinse that. Remember, it's been sanitized. So we're going to get all of that in there. Alright, once that is mixed together, it is going to look a lot like a beer. Look at that. And then we're going to put that right back on the heat. We're going to bring it back up to a boil. But before we do, take your hops, throw those in there. If you want to cover this and boil it, that's fine. You do not have to. So now I'm going to set a timer for 45 minutes. And then at the 45-minute mark, we're going to add this stuff here, the malt extract syrup, and let it boil for another 15 minutes. And then we're going to rapidly bring the temperature down in an ice bath. Hey guys, the 45-minute timer just went off, and that means it's time to put in the malt extract syrup. So I'm going to get, once again, a sanitized utensil. We're going to start dumping this in here and stirring it in, and then we're going to let it boil for another 15 minutes. I want to get all of this stuff in there. So after you just let it dump in, it's a real good idea to pour some hot water directly into this, or you can actually pour some of your wort directly into it and clear it out that way. Either way is fine. Just don't go too crazy with the water because you don't want to dilute your beer wort at this point. We're going to let this boil for 15 minutes, and then we're going to chill it really fast in an ice bath. Okay, so it is time to take the beer off the heat and cool it. Now there's a lot of ways you could do this. First thing you're going to do, turn the heat off and take this kettle off the heat. And you can see this is what it looks like now. Looks amazing. Now here it is, a Coleman cooler that is bigger than the pot. I've dumped 10 pounds of ice in here, and I've got another 10 pounds I'm going to dump around it, and then some ice cold water, and I'm actually going to float some ice on this container that I have sanitized the outside of. I'll fill it with ice and float it to help bring the temperature down as well. I know I keep saying this word over and over again, but everything has to be sanitized. I have sanitized the outside of the pan. I have sanitized the inside of the cooler. So we're going to set this pan straight down in onto that ice. And then surround it with some more ice. Just create a big ice bath to bring the temperature on this wort down. The faster we get this cooled, the better, because it'll hold the flavors that way. Ideally, we want to get the temperature on this wort down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit or below as fast as possible. Once we get to that range, then we're ready to move to the fermenter. While we're waiting for the wort to chill to put in the fermenter, we got to get the fermenter ready. So it needs to be cleaned and sanitized. You should have done that already anyway. We're going to take the top off because I have an air seal so that it remains sanitary. We're going to add 2 gallons of cold water. One of the big questions I've been asked over the years is, what kind of water should I use? Well, you can use distilled water or spring water. You could go get bottled water, whatever you like. But if your tap water is good where you live, just use tap water. Here where I live in Wichita, the tap water is very good. So there's absolutely no reason to spend money on water. Alright, so the wort has had about 30 minutes to cool, and it's down to about 56 degrees, which is just about perfect. Just right under that 60 barrier. What we're going to do is transfer it from the kettle to the fermenter. Now, one thing I highly recommend is a colander. And what do you know? freshly sanitized. The reason for this is as you get toward the bottom of the wort, there might be some large solids, and you don't want those transferring over. We're going to build enough of those during fermentation. We don't want to start with them. Okay, so I've put the colander up here on top just to strain this as I go. And all I'm going to do is just start pouring it right in. I know you can't see, I'll come from a different angle. As you get toward the bottom, you're going to see it's a little thicker and there's a little more solids there. Give this a minute to let it run through the colander and strain as much of the solids as possible before you fill it all the way up. Then, once we get all the wort transferred, we're going to keep adding cold water until we get to the 5-gallon point, which on a fermenter like this should be measured and marked. If you're using one that's not marked, then it's a good idea to fill it with 5 gallons of water at some point, figure out exactly where that line is. Now I wanted to show you why I used a strainer. These are the solids I'm talking about. Okay, liquid won't even pass through there anymore. So if you can get most of that stuff out before you start fermentation, you'll have a much better product. At this point, all the wort has been transferred. And we're sitting right about 20 degrees Celsius, which is just about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're going to add water till we get up to about the 5-gallon mark, and then throw our yeast in here, close it up, and put some water in our bubbler. Okay, so we're at 5 gallons. Now the next thing we got to do is pitch our yeast. This is the yeast that was included with the kit, but if you have a preferred yeast, you don't have to use dry yeast. You can use live yeast, you can use liquid yeast, whatever you prefer, but I like the dry yeast. I'm going to cut it open with a pair of sanitized scissors. I know I keep saying that word, but I promise you it really does matter. If you have anything in here that's not sanitary, it's going to spoil your beer almost instantly. Alright, so we're going to pitch the yeast. That means you just throw it in the container on the top. Make sure you get it all as you want it. Then we're going to stir this just a little bit so the yeast is activated. And all I'm doing is moving the yeast around so that it gets down in the liquid, because in order for it to activate, it's going to have to make good contact. Alright, so next we take our bubbler. I'm going to put my lid on and close it all the way. No matter what kind of container you're using, you've got to make sure you have a good airtight seal. What's going to happen here is carbon dioxide is going to build up as the yeast eats the sugars. So you need that carbon dioxide to escape, but you don't want any air going in. That's the purpose of this thing. We're going to put a little bit of water in it so that it looks kind of like that. So what's going to happen as the carbon dioxide comes up, the bubble will run through the tube and out the top. And the faster your fermenting is going on, the faster these bubbles are going to happen. It generally takes about 1 to 3 days for your fermentation to begin. So if it's not bubbling in the first 24 hours, don't get scared. It's going to take a little bit of time. All right, next thing I'll show you is when it starts bubbling, so you see what it looks like.